Welcome to the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation's Live Better series. Well, this is starting out well today, isn't it? I'm Rob Girth. I'm the Director of Digital Media here at the Foundation, and today we are talking about hand cycling, and we're lucky enough to have an incredible expert on the phone with us, whom you'll meet in just a minute. But first, a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to have some Q&A at the end, and you'll be able to use the chat feature for that. And we're also going to be able, you're going to be able to talk to the guest directly. And here to get all the logistics of that straightened out is our operator, Lynn, with the details.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to ask a question over the phone, please call 1-800-931-1309. Again, the number is 1-800-931-1309. Once connected, press the 1 followed by the 4, and you'll be in the queue to ask a question.
Thank you, Lynn. And now our host for today is Candace Cable, and Candace is a pioneer in the sport of wheelchair racing and a 12-time Paralympic medalist in 3 different sports. Candace, how are you doing today?
I'm awesome. I'm excited.
Excellent. Yeah, you told me it was like 12 degrees below zero where you live, and I thought, oh, good, I'm glad I live on the East Coast.
Right, yeah, that was this morning. It's warmed up to the kind of low 50s now.
Nice. Still glad I live on the East Coast. All right, go ahead. Let's talk hand cycling.
Yeah, let's get started. Hey, everybody. I'm really honored and grateful that you joined us today for this Christopher and Dana Reeve Live Better series on adaptive sport, where we get to spend some time exploring one of our spotlight sports with an expert. And then our intention really is to stay healthy, and that's by learning about a new sport or maybe learning a little bit about a sport that we've never done before or one that we're familiar with. Our expert today is Muffy Davis, and Muffy is a true champion in every definition of the word. She's a leader, a defender, a supporter, and a victor. All these words define Muffy Davis, and she's actually a really, really dear friend of mine. As a leader, Muffy graduated Stanford University with a human biology degree and a concentration in disability studies. She was honored by the Stanford alumni with their only award for community service. As a motivational speaker, Muffy shares a message of don't just survive, thrive to corporations and companies throughout the world, including the World Health Organization and the United Nations, as well as being a sought-after on- and off-camera talent hosting television shows, including ESPN and Resort Sports Networks. Muffy has been a spokesperson for Independent Technologies and the CDC's Tobacco-Free Sports Program, just to name a few. As a defender, she currently serves as the ambassador for the International Paralympic Committee and Right to Play, an international humanitarian organization, and is the past athlete representative for Paralympic skiing to the U.S. Olympic Committee's Athlete Advisory Council. Muffy works as a freelance writer. As a supporter, she was a founding member and currently serves as the honorary board member of the Sun Valley Adaptive Sports, as an alumni member of Stanford University and the United States Disabled Ski Association. Muffy has sat on boards of the Make-A-Wish Foundation, U.S. Skiing, SnowBoard Association, and currently serves on the International Paralympic Committee Women in Sports Committee. As a victor, Muffy has garnered plenty of hardware in winter and summer sports. Even before her spinal cord injury at the age of 16, Muffy was winning alpine ski races with her sights set on the Olympics. As a fifth skier, she's won more than 25 World Cup titles, 2 overall World Cup victories. An overall World Cup is huge because that shows consistency, and 4 Paralympic medals. Muffy was inducted into the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame, as well as the Disabled Sports USA inducted her into their Ski Hall of Fame. Her summer sports of hand cycling called her name, and she answered. She is a 2-time overall World Cup champion, 4-time world champion, and 3-time gold medalist in the 2012 Paralympic Games. It doesn't stop there. Muffy is a big-time outdoor enthusiast. She has climbed Pikes Peak in her wheelchair. She has been kiting and bungee jumping. She became the first woman paraplegic to summit Mount Shasta on these snow pods, which are hand cyclish. We'll probably hear a little bit about that. She's done some indoor bull riding and bobsledding, And she carried the torch as well as lit some flames and hearts with that red dress for her 2013 ESPY nomination as Best Female Athlete. And if that's not enough, Muffy keeps moving. She's married to Jeff, and as you can see, they got married outdoors. They have a daughter, Ellie, and Muffy self-stated Ellie's her greatest accomplishment. Welcome, Muffy.
Thank you, Candace. Wow, I don't know if I can live up to that introduction.
But these are all things you've already done.
It's an honor to be here and share with you all today.
Oh, well, so Muffy, let's get started. How did your spinal cord injury happen?
Well, I grew up in Sun Valley, Idaho, that beautiful mountain you see back there. That was my backyard. And I started skiing when I was 3 years old. And it was my life goal and dream to be a ski racer and compete in the Olympics in ski racing. And then one early morning when I was 16 years old, I went off of an early morning downhill training run at about 50 miles an hour into the trees, as you can see in that picture. That's the exact picture of the course. I went off into those trees, I flew about 15 feet and impacted the first tree with my back, bounced off of that tree and hit the next tree with my head, where I shattered my fiberglass helmet. And I was very fortunate that I had a really good helmet on. Unfortunately, when I hit that first tree, I didn't have any fiberglass protection, and that's where I sustained my spinal cord injury at the thoracic 5-6 level.
Okay, so are people wearing body armor now to protect their backs when they're skiing?
There is a new piece that racers wear, a new piece of equipment they call it a turtle shell that some of the racers can wear. It's not fiberglass, but it's a compressed hard foam that they'll wear under their their speed suits to protect them. And who knows, it might have helped me. I'm not sure I had such a high force into such a hard object. Who knows what it could have, or it might not have. But we don't look back, we look forward.
Yeah. Do you have an idea how fast you're going?
About 50 miles an hour, it's estimated, we think.
Okay. Wow. That's, yeah. I mean, I've taken some slow skiing, and 50 miles an hour is dynamic, and especially when you hit something that stops. So where did you do your rehabilitation?
So since I was injured in Idaho, we didn't really have any rehab facilities there. I was flown to Craig Hospital in Englewood, Colorado, where I did my rehab. And again, this is in '89, so back then I was in the hospital for 3 months to do my rehab. Now I know that's not the case nowadays, that patients with my level of injury would probably get 4 weeks, maybe 5 weeks inpatient. So I think I was very fortunate back then to have the time that I did to adjust and to have all that time relearning and learning what was out there and available.
And in '89, there were some sports going on, skiing, which is a sport that you were passionate about before, was really getting some movement out there. Were you introduced to skiing in the hospital, or was it after? Because I know that's the first sport you took up before handcycling.
Correct. I was. While I was in the rehab hospital, they told me that I could still ski again, and they kind of introduced me to the Paralympic competition, that if I really wanted to race. But initially it was too emotionally difficult for me to really think about skiing any other way. Plus, I was convinced I was going to walk again, so I was going to stand up on skis and ski the way I always had, so I didn't need to learn that. But the next winter came around and the snow fell and I wasn't walking, and I really missed being out on that mountain. So I went and I took adaptive lessons down in Winter Park, Colorado, my first kind of introduction back into the snow, and it was great to be back. It was anything but easy. It was a very hard learning curve.
Well, were there any words of wisdom that came forth that helped you make that shift? Because so many of us, when we have a traumatic spinal cord injury, do go to that place, and so we should. I'm going to walk again and do everything. But it's also important to get healthy and create community so that we're ready for when that cure does come down the line. Were there any words of wisdom or anything that you saw that said, I should move forward and check all this out?
Well, I think what I like to say and what I believe is that everyone has their acceptance and their healing comes in their own time. And so really you have to give yourself permission to be where you are. For me, it came when the next snow fell, and I was like, I don't care how I have to get on that mountain. I really just want to be back out on the mountain because that's where my spirit was whole. And so it took that time to trying to imagine a whole winter of not being able to ski when I knew that I could be out there. That was harder than trying to ski a different way. So, but I tell everyone you have to give yourself permission to be in wherever you are. But I didn't want to miss it. I felt very fortunate that I could still get out on the mountain, and even though it was very hard, and it definitely took a few years and a long time with the adaptive equipment, getting it dialed in, just being on the mountain was healing and therapeutic for me.
And you were saying that equipment was key, especially with your spinal cord injury level, to be able to be successful in a sport and to feel comfortable in a sport. So your seating was always something that was primary. Is that correct?
Correct, especially in skiing and alpine skiing, because your core, your abdominal function and your core body parts is very vital in skiing. It's essentially your boot as like an able-bodied skier. And so when I was first injured 24 years ago, the equipment really wasn't designed for high-level injuries. And they'd set me in a seat and they just kind of put a bunch of padding around it. Well, that didn't give me the stability. When I'd try and get on edge, I would lose control. There was no stability. So it took a while, and it took definitely some instructors that went above and beyond the 2-hour lesson, and it really helped me figure out the right equipment and get my seat dialed in. Once that happened, all of it started coming right back, and I was able to really learn the sport. It was very similar to able-bodied skiing. I just had to figure out that equipment.
Yeah, and you had a wildly successful career in skiing, and you took a break. So how did you transition into hand cycling? What was the inspiration with that for you?
Well, honestly, after I retired in 2002 from skiing after the 2002 games in the U.S. in Salt Lake, and thought, the next step, go get a real job and start a family. I ended up meeting my husband, and we ended up taking a year actually and traveling the world, volunteering and doing some fun things. And then the next step was to start a family. So after I had my daughter in 2008, I kind of did what I think most women do after you have a baby, and you look at your body and you go, what happened? And I just wanted to get back in shape and lose some of the baby weight. And I knew hand cycling was one of those few sports that's really good for us for aerobic workouts. It's so hard with a spinal cord injury to really get a good aerobic workout. And I had a hand cycle, but I just had done it recreationally, and I'd never really done it as a means of fitness and getting in shape. So I got back on my bike, but set a goal to do a marathon 4 months after my daughter was born, and that kind of started it all.
Now, is this the bike you did the marathon in?
No, that's actually a bike that I had rode before. This is about in 2000, and it's amazing to see how the technology has evolved and changed in hand cycling. When I was first injured 24 years ago, they didn't even have hand cycles. The only option was your favorite piece of equipment, the wheelchair racer, and I had one of those, and I don't know how you did it, Candace. They're not comfortable. but a hand cycle is way more user-friendly, easier to get in and out of, and so this is kind of one of the earlier, this is about in 2000, one of the earlier upright bikes. This wasn't my bike. It was actually from a program that up at the National Ability Center in Park City, right by where I live, that I would ride. But actually the next slide, if you show the next slide, that is the bike that I did do my first race in. This was my first personal hand cycle. It was a Force, top-end Force. They still do make these bikes, and they are adjustable. You can raise the cranks heights and width, and then you can raise the seat up and back and recline it back a certain amount, and then, but Handcycle's technology has just evolved so fast because the sport is really still such a new sport, and the rules have evolved and changed. So the technology is keeping up with all of that.
So this was your first bike that you had, and did you make a lot of adjustments on it so that you could make a decision as to what your next bike would be configured as?
I did. So when I first got this top-end Force, I was sitting a lot more upright like I was in the picture before. And then as technology evolved and I learned and I started getting into racing and I saw that people were getting more reclined and laying back further and further, I dropped the back of this bike down more. A lot of that is for aerodynamics, why we are reclined so far. There are definitely certain rules in racing as to how far reclined you can be, and it's also when you get reclined way back like you see in some of my later racing pictures, it's more difficult to see, so your vision isn't as clear. So if you're going to just recreationally ride, definitely sitting up in a sit-up bike or somewhat adjustable and reclining it a little bit back would be more conducive. But if you're serious about racing and you want to get in, then getting into the reclined position and as far recumbent as you can get back there is definitely an advantage aerodynamically. But yes, so to answer your question.
It did answer my question to a certain degree. And one of the questions I want to ask about the sit-up bike, I'm looking at it, and earlier we talked about how seating was important with the skiing. Mm-hmm. This looks like you're just held in with straps, and that that it's not a real snug fit for seating. Would that be critical for someone having a good experience with their seating with cycling also?
Well, it is not nearly as important or as imperative the seating support in cycling as it was in skiing, because you are not leaning nearly as much in the hand cycle as like where your core is doing all the work skiing and you could fall over. Mm-hmm. The hand cycle, because of your position, not nearly as much as the core. There are hand cycles, though, that are lean to steer hand cycles where someone would want a fair bit of core trunk stability. That would be the, why can't I remember the name of the hand cycle?
Freedom Rider.
Freedom Rider, thank you.
Freedom Rider.
The Freedom Rider, the lean to steer bikes, someone maybe with a slightly lower injury than mine that might have some lats and some more of the core muscles to do that lean to steer. Those were difficult for me purely because that, unless you had a better seating system where you were strapped in more. But you don't want to be strapped in too tight into the bike either. It's a balance. I do straps around my my thighs, lower body, and then my knees and my ankles are strapped in to the bike. But the rest, you want to be able to move enough so that if you have to lean on turns, you have that freedom to move and lean. Now, I have never really competed on the lean to steer bike, so I wouldn't be a good person to talk on how that works as well. But
well, I know the lean to steer bikes are two pieces, and they do have a little bit of a problem on very fast downhills with some wobble, and that the frames that are one piece, the type that you're in this one and in the next picture, those frames have more stability. Just because I've ridden both of them, I'm saying this because by no way am I an expert. But the rigid frame seems to be able to hold speed a little bit better, but the turning radius is a little wider because you don't have that leaning ability.
That would explain then why we don't see many of those lean to steer bikes in racing, in elite level, at the World Cup level racing. So you don't see many of those, probably because of the stability at high speeds.
Right, because you want to go as fast as you can.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Right. So when you, I want to get back to this adjustable bike because I think this is possibly something that people would look for at programs so that they can try a lot of positions. what muscles are you using when you're riding your bike? What are critical?
Well, you're using whatever you've got, as we all know, but it's not as, whereas in skiing and some of those other sports, the core muscles, your abdominal muscles and those muscles were really a huge benefit. In cycling, those, the lower muscles will really only be a benefit on maybe some of the higher and longer hill climbs where you could dig in as you're pulling up. But most of your muscles are going to be your biceps, your triceps, your arm, your shoulders, if you have lats, and whatever you've got up there. But a lot of it also cycling is, remember, it's not so much power-based as it is endurance. And you have all your gears, so you're supposed to be using your gears so that you can, get your arms cranking at a high rate, and it's not so much how strong you are, but how long you can keep and how fast you can keep those RPMs going high.
So
I've
would
had
that
to
be
learn all of this,
spinning?
Candace. Spinning,
yes,
exactly.
absolutely. Okay, so spinning, so moving in a circular motion quickly is
right.
what
So,
really what
and we call it
cycling
RPMs. Revolutions per minute, or your cadence in cycling, we call it the cadence, and that's how many times around your arms go a minute. And we like to keep our cadences. Well, I am more a power rider. Just I think a lot is my body type and my body build, in that I have a lower cadence and I push harder. But I'm also a bigger, for a woman, I'm a bigger woman, and I have more of that muscle mass. But some of the other riders will be higher cadence and less power, but they'll have, or less, they're not pushing as hard, but their overall power wattage will be about the same. But they're just spinning more revolutions per minute than I may be. Okay,
and what cadence does Muffy Davis spin at on a flat course? Let's say a flat course.
Well, it'll be anywhere. It depends on how long it is, and it depends on how hard I want to push. But I will range my cadence anywhere. I try and keep it, for me, I've discovered mine best is somewhere between 90 and 100 revolutions per minute. A lot of the other riders will go between 100 and 110. So anywhere, you definitely want to be over 90 RPMs in your cadence. I think, but then when you get on hills and you get pushing more, you're definitely, your cadence will drop and you will push a harder, basically it's like you're pushing a harder gear because the terrain has moved it.
Will you change your gears so that you can continue the same cadence?
You can, yep. You can change out until you get to a certain point when you're in your granny low and you have no more gears, and those are the big hills. But those are definitely things you adjust on your bike when you're setting up your system. For example, I live on the top of a half a mile. I have to climb a 13% grade for not the whole half a mile, but to get to my house at the end of my workouts. So I have a chain ring, my low little chain ring that's 24 or 28, one of the two. I can't remember which I have on now, but that's a really small chain ring that I drop down into, so that I'm not just beat up by the time I get to my house, but that I am able to drop down into that easier gear and spin up that as much as possible.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you, because it looks like that you are holding on to the grips, and I wondered if there was any type of adaptation for someone who has limited hand strength to be able to do that, and then how they would, this is kind of a two-part question, how they would shift their gears.
Yes, there are lots of different adaptations for quadriplegics and people with limited hand mobility. In fact, there's a whole class in hand cycling competition, the H1 class, which is for high-level injuries. It's all people that have upper extremity involvement. And they have designed all different kinds of, whether it be handles that just go onto our different cranks. They're just different handles that come on that either, there's multiple different forms, but the one that I'm most familiar with, it's like two pegs and your hand just slides right in and it holds it there. And then the shifting, I've seen everything. So some people have, if you can use with your thumb, you can thumb shift. If you can't use your thumb, they have the index pointer shifters if you're able to use any of your fingers. Or there is a girl competed from Canada who had basically like a sip and puff wheelchair, and she would shift with breathing the way she breathed, and could get the gears to shift. Now it definitely adds weight into the bike, and the goal is to drop as much weight as possible, but it enabled her to actually get out there and ride and compete. So there are so many different options and choices. That's, I think, one of the neat attractions of hand cycling to people is that it's easy to get into, a sport easy to get into, but it's been adapted and it can fit and work for almost anyone.
Well, and I'm curious about the sip and puff. How quickly does the exhale and the inhale of the breath help shift the gears? Did you have an opportunity to ask her about that, or?
Yeah, I do not recall. I did. We talked to her for a while about it, but it was a couple of years ago, and I do not recall exactly how quickly it went. But I know that it was very similar to the sip and puff like wheelchairs, in that the way she breathed, you breathe in or you breathe out, and you can do a couple puffs, would actually shift it, which I think is amazing technology. They also have electronic shifters now, which are I've myself never used, but which are easy, and it takes a lot less pressure to actually shift with them. So again, the options, it's great that there are so many options out there, and that the opportunity to make the sport available to as many people as possible.
Well, and then looking at the bike, I've heard it said that the bike is set up upside down backwards from a two-wheel bike that someone standing up would use. Is that a correct way to kind of look at it?
Yes. Anytime I take my bike into someone that may have not ever worked on hand cycles, I tell them at first to just flip it over, because then they see the components. It's all the same bike components. We just have reversed it. And, of course, our chainring or our cassette would be a rear cassette in an upright bike, but it's in the front for us. And so then the derailleur would be hanging. So it's really, just like you said, a bike flipped upside down.
Well, and have you made any adaptations for your braking or, any of your shifter cables? Because it looks like as you would pedal your bike, some of those cables might move around and have a possibility to break. Is that something that could happen?
Yes, that was one of the things when I first started into the sport that drove me crazy the most, is that I was breaking cables left and right, because as you can see in this picture, those cables that go over, and every crank that you use, every time you crank around, they have to bend. And again, we're using bike equipment and technology, and it wasn't meant to be moving and bending so much, so that I was breaking cables left and right and changing them, and very frustrating. What I actually learned from a fellow cyclist, hand cyclist and friend, was about these little, I don't know what they even call them, they're like little noodles. Basically, they're just little brake noodles, and they're very flexible, and it enabled me to take my cables and weave them so they come underneath, and then they go up to the derailleur and bend, and they're just flexible brake noodles. And it enables it so that the cables, instead of going over the top, cannot come from underneath. They do hit my body when I ride, so some people don't like that idea. I haven't had a problem as long as I have a shirt or something on. I haven't had any problem with friction or any skin breakdown. I also have done some adjustments. Everyone likes to customize kind of your seating system. Well, you can see in this position, in this picture, my knees are kind of bent. Some people like their legs straighter. It all depends on what works for you. Some people can't get their legs really straight, and so they need to adapt and adjust. I put some kayak foam I found is the best foam, and I went and got a whole bunch of kayak foam, and I cut it down and I put it under the front, kind of right under my hips and my my upper legs, thighs, to get them in the position so that I could get my hips kind of locked down, and so I wouldn't slide forward, and then my knees would be in the right position. So those are really the adaptations.
Can you draw on the picture right there to show us about where you put that blocking? Because it sounds really customized, but also very dynamic in being able to keep you in the right
So
position
kind of
to
right
use all of
here.
your power. Okay.
I took the kayaks home and I just lifted the seat up. Sorry, nice drawing here. But it's basically
it's
just
perfect.
kind of right under there on both sides, and it slid right into the front of my bike, and it kind of just stays there all the time. And it helps. The reason I like that too is a lot of times I was finding here, you can see I'm going up a hill and I'm actually in way too big of a gear and pushing too hard. I'm not spinning like I should be, but I was still pretty early. I was still learning. But what I was finding without that block too, and when my hips were more flat, is that I was sliding forward a lot, and I was losing a lot of my power just into sliding around on the seat. So by having that foam there to get my hips kind of locked back, and then those straps across my waist, I've even since then I've moved my straps further down so they would be more on the USA. So my straps kind of go now right about here. Sorry.
Oh, rather than above the A?
Instead of up at my waist, I have moved them so they're down a little further, and it keeps me, I found that block and those straps keep me really locked in place so that all of my power when I'm pulling and pushing goes into the bike instead of movement of my positioning.
Which is critical for your forward movement, right?
Right. Well, that's lost power. That's why we're working. All the bike technology is working to make them as everything you put into it goes straight into the bike and into moving forward. But if you're moving on the bike, then you're losing the power. It's not going into the bike. It's just going into sliding around. So, but that took a while to figure all of that out. It's definitely it's been an evolutionary. I would say 2012 was the year it all came together for me.
Mhm. Well, and it really looked like it with your results. It definitely looked like that. and when you had the adjustable bike, it gave you the opportunity to try a lot of different things. So what I hear you saying is that it's an evolution.
In this picture, this Force R, it is still adjustable. There are still adjustable components. In fact, the slide before, this slide, this was kind of the version before this bike, but it would still be the same bike now. And this is it's a whole new design that Top End has come out with, and it is a great bike, the Force R. I currently ride a Force RX now, which I went and I tried a Force X for a while, but the difficulty there is no adjustability. And so if anything's off, but the RX it's not adjustable. I don't adjust in my cranks and everything up here now. There's no adjustability here, but there's still back adjustability. So you can see where I'm kind of drawing in my RX, and that's the difference, except it has a carbon back instead of an aluminum back. But the Force R and the Force RX, I love them. They're great bikes. I have tried a carbon bike, and again, it was a good bike. It's just, for me, what personally worked great, and they're here in the U.S., and they have been sponsoring me, so I have stayed with Top End Force.
But the carbon bike, was one of the problems just non-adjustability for you, or
no? The carbon bike has lots of adjustability. I think I didn't ride it for a long time. I had a sponsor that was kind enough to buy me a bike to try it out before London, because I was at that phase where I didn't want to go in not knowing what was out there and if it was better. And I rode it, and my times, even though it was a little lighter than my Force bike, my times and my power was not any better. So I just went back to I was really more comfortable turning on my Force, and it just worked out better for me. I think it's a very individual thing, and people have to, if they get the opportunity to try each bike, that's the way to go. Now, that's pretty hard because, each bike's about $10,000, so unless your program has those available. But I would say they're very comparable in terms of the technology. They're all great bikes.
And it seems like Handcycling has taken off, and the majority of the organizations out there like Disabled Sports USA, all of them have summer programs that have a different variety of hand cycles. And so we're going to have that kind of information up on the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation site so that people can just check into some of the options before they actually jump in with both feet and buy a bike. Because as you said, it can be upwards to $10,000, and that's really a lot of money. For
right. I would definitely urge people. Hopefully you get a chance to try a couple of different bikes before you jump out. Now there are also used bikes out there that people can purchase and buy through BikeOn and other programs, which is a great way if you're just getting into it. A lot of times you can find a lot of the athletes at the elite level will be selling bikes, and try and get some used bikes. That way if you want to get into racing and you want to get more, like a Force R or Force RX, or a carbon bike, you can hopefully find them cheaper by someone that might be upgrading to the next version, and we'll be selling one as well.
And as you said, BikeOn sounds like a great community resource also. Is that right?
Right. Yes,
cool.
BikeOn, and they have a whole classified section, so they have used hand cycles for sale there. Now they go fast, so if you're really in the market and looking, you have to be following it fast because the good ones will definitely go fast. But they're a good resource, as well as U.S. Handcycling. Their website, they have a lot of information, and they have the listing of all of the race series and what will be going on around the country, as well as different adaptive camps. And then U.S. Paralympics on their website, if you look under cycling, there's a whole bunch of resource information there as well, especially for people that are interested in getting into racing and figuring out how do I go about it and what's the process to kind of start the racing. And then as you want to, say you want to make the U.S. team, what are the standards and requirements required to do that?
Yeah, and you gave us all those resources, so we're going to be able to put those up so people can have a look and see where they want to get started with cycling. Now, I went on one of the websites and looked at the different classifications, and I posted this the way that I saw it on there was that there were multiple classifications, but I want you to correct me because there's actually, it's one classification now for the H1, and then for the H2, the H3, and the H4. So let's talk a little bit about that H1 class. Do you see very many?
Well, Candace, you are correct in the way it is printed like this. There are this many classes. There is an H1 class that is split into H1.1 and H1.2. But in racing and when we compete, there are only medals for H1, H2, H3, H4. There have not been enough athletes yet to split that up. Now the reason they did that is because it's a new enough classification system. It's actually really brand new. It started my first year racing. And they're looking at evaluating it and changing it even again. So since it's so new and they're trying to figure it all out, that's why they did all these little classes. But in terms of medal events, it's H1, H2, H3, and H4, and sometimes those will be combined as well. It depends. Like in the Paralympics, I was combined, H1 and H2 were combined, and the H1s had a factor, essentially, that their times would have been multiplied by. No, we do not see a lot of H1, at least in the women's fields. There are a fair number of H1 men competing internationally, but there always could be more. Definitely there are more H2 and H3 men internationally competing, the lower level injuries. There are for sure not many H1-1s. Those would be the class, the H1-1s would be the class that require the most adaptations to the bike in terms of shifting and being able to adjust the bike. So most of, if there is H1s competing, most of them would be H1.2. But again, it gets very confusing. As we always talk about classification, it's one of the most confusing subjects. But so H1s essentially are quadriplegic. Anyone that have upper extremity involvement is the cut and dry, simple, basic part of it. There have been incomplete quads that have been classified as H2s, and they're still trying to figure all of that out, H2.1. So there are challenges in the system as it is, but essentially H1 would be quadriplegic if you have limited hand functioning, upper body. Most likely you'd be in H1. If you have some trunk stability and some trunk stuff, but a little hand stuff, you might be thrown into the H2. But generally, H1 ends at about T3, and then H2 starts at about T4 to T10 generally. and you can see the breakdown at T1 to 3 sometimes is H2.1. So it's difficult. I'm still trying to understand it all. What I can tell you is that I am an H2 and all of the H2s have always just been one class, and we've competed. And then the lower, if you're about a T10 or a T11 and lower, you'd probably be an H3, like you can see here. And then the next level is H4, which would be which we call the kneelers, and which would be your incomplete spinal cord injuries, perhaps people that have mobility and are able to walk around but might use a chair part-time or might not even need to use a chair, or your double amputees. So the picture you see here is of Alexis Zanardi, Alessandro Zanardi, who was the Italian who won the golds in London in the time trial and the road race, and he is a double amputee. We also have in the U.S., those of you who might be familiar with Oscar Sanchez, who's a spinal cord injury, but he's incomplete, so he can walk, and then he kneels on his bike. So those are that class who would, and this is a general overview. It's good to know kind of where you'd break down so as you can look at your standards if you're interested in getting into racing, but also it's vital to get classified to find out exactly where you would be.
Well, and it looks like from the H1 to H2 that, again, as you mentioned, the core element of the body is not as critical. But as you get into the H3 and the H4, especially in that H4 position where they're kneeling, they look like they're really using a lot of core to power down on the hand grips.
Exactly. So what I said about positioning not really mattering, it doesn't as much in the recumbent bikes, but when you get to the upright and the kneeling bikes, it is vital. And that's why someone at my injury level would not be able to really do a kneeler bike, because I don't have the balance or the functioning muscles to get the bike back up, from in the pull position. To hold myself there. So, so that is why it's lower functioning. Now, there are some double amputees that have raced as an H3. I don't know exactly who can choose or how it goes about. Sometimes there are also people that cannot bend their knees. They may be able to walk, but they can't bend their knees. So instead of doing a 4, they might have the trunk stability and muscles to do a 4, but they can't get in the position. So they get classified as a 3.
So as a 3, between a 3 and a 4, is the way you position on your bike a piece of the equation as to what classification you would be put into?
I cannot adequately answer that. Basically, I know, I know that if you are not functionally able to get in the position of a 4 but want to race, I believe you could be classified as a 3. Now, there have been questions about there's some 3s that why don't they get in that position, and that is why they have these well-trained classifiers that are the experts that go through and know functionally and what you're able to do in the position you're able to put your body in without overstraining it or hurting it.
Right.
Well, with
classification.
H4 is H4 is the most functional class. And also the fastest. Those H4 riders, because they're able to use so many more muscles and their full back and all of their trunk and all of that, they are by far the fastest racers.
Right, and with classification, I'm going to guess that it's the same throughout the system. Is they're doing medical classification, and then they're doing what you called functional classification or technical. And within those 2 types of classifications. And that's really looking at the person and putting them, through their paces basically, and then watching them do their sport. They can then decide where someone would fit in the system. And as we all know, the system keeps evolving. It's a breathing, living being.
Correct. It even says here, if you read in this H4, it says, kneeling position in case of mobility reduction if prevents kneeling, and the athlete can use a recumbent bike in H3. So it does say that. So, and that's what I had been told. But again, since it's not my exact class and I haven't been classified in there, I don't ever want to misinform people. But that's my understanding.
Well, And I mean, if anybody is interested in racing, they need to keep up on how classification is changing because it does constantly change. And that's always a piece of the equation for, you know, anyone that wants to compete on any level with any type of sport. Well, let's see. I think we kind of made it through our slides. We've got about 15 minutes left. We can open up our lines to people if they want to ask questions of you. And I'm not responsible for any question they ask you. I haven't given them guidelines, so who knows?
There's any questions, fine. But no, it's just hand cycling is it's a great sport. I mean, who doesn't like to ride a bike, Candace? And it's so great that we can do that and that the technology is available. And I mean, I have so much fun. I get to go out with my husband and my daughter and just recreationally ride like a family, which is so fun to just be able to do.
Exactly. That's one of the beauties of the sport is that, as you said, you can go ride with your family. You can go on training rides with a group or a club and be able to keep up. I mean, people aren't actually going to be slowing down to include you in the event, and that's a key, I think, for my own self, and I think for a lot of people is being able to feel like I'm included in, you know, all the different aspects of life, and sport definitely, activity is a huge part of that. And for you, now you've got several sports that you've become, you know, very expert at, and so you must have year-round. I mean, your racing season for cycling has finished, and how will you spend your winter?
Well, this is my off season, so I get all my surgeries done. I rehab. You rehab back, and then the winter I actually have gotten into Nordic skiing because it's a great cross training tool. So, and you know that well, Candace, what a great, you know, fitness it is. So I will do a lot of Nordic skiing, but my daughter is also skiing now, so alpine skiing. So we get to go back out on the mountains on the weekends and do some alpine skiing. And I do a lot of cross-training with either Nordic skiing or swimming, but I also spend a lot of time on the trainer since I live up in Utah, so it's not easy to be on the road. But cycling, it's basically just time on the bike and as much time on the bike as you can. So I get caught up in all the shows that I missed in the summer, and I watch Netflix and ride my bike for 2 hours at a time at home, inside.
Build that base, right?
Yep, it's all about building a base.
Well, you mentioned you get caught up on your surgeries. What surgeries have you had as far as injuries that might be related with hand cycling or something else? I think you had a neck surgery before your 2012 event.
I did. I had to have a neck fusion. I was losing functioning in my left arm because I had a slipped disc. So 10 months before the 2012 games, I had to have a neck fusion. Fortunately, it all turned out great. I came back stronger than I had been and was able to rehab back. But again, you know, I do that in the off season. So in October this year, I had to have carpal tunnel surgery. 24 years in a wheelchair, just overuse, and using my hands so much on the bike, holding in that position, I think just kind of led to having to have that. So I just had carpal tunnel release surgery. I am actually going to have a baclofen pump put in about 2 weeks because I have incredibly bad spasticity, and that has caused numerous other complications. So that was a hard decision to make, but you know, again, get it done in the fall so that I can rehab back, and then my first race we'll have a fun race the end of January, but the World Cup season starts usually end of May, June. So.
Now, as you rehab back, say from your carpal tunnel surgery, does that limit your ability to use your hand and possibly your arm for a while? How do you deal with that?
It does. It wasn't too bad, actually. About 2 weeks that I had to splint on full time with stitches in, and then, after that, after I got the stitches out, the doctor gave me free rein to go and you know, let pain be your guide. Now my hand is still quite sore. It's my dominant hand. I'm left-handed, and I had my left hand done. It's still quite sore, and I can still use that splint, which helps. But you can still push around in the splint. But functionally wise, yeah, it works fine. I just got, you know, we overuse our hands as it is, so he's not surprised that it's more sore than it might have been for other people. And so it's just working through that pain. I just yesterday had a nice massage, and he focused on my hand, and I do a lot of hot-cold therapy and just trying to loosen up those muscles and get them working again. But so far I have no numbness, so that's been really good.
Oh, that is great, because that is one of the symptoms of the reoccurring carpal tunnel, correct? Okay.
Correct. That's why I chose to have the surgery, because my hand was going numb all the time.
And that inhibited your ability to hold on to the handle on the bike also? I mean, would it decrease your power? Oh, it did.
Yes,
okay.
And it was incredibly painful. It was just like your hand was shooting knives into your fingers. And so cycling, it was painful, but I couldn't even write. Like, it was difficult holding a pen and writing at times. So, I definitely waited till I needed it.
Yeah, you waited. You waited, and I want to know how you dealt with the pain as you waited. I
had steroid injections.
I
had some cortisone injections into my carpal tunnel to help relieve some of that swelling and pain to get through the competitive season. Not advised to anyone unless it's what you have to do. And my doctor was not going to give me another injection. It was we had to have the surgery or we had to figure out another way. So, but that's a good doctor. So
right.
But
so why did you say it's not advised, the injections?
Because it's a temporary fix. The cortisone injections are not a permanent fix. They're a temporary fix. Some people, you can try one injection and see if it really helps, but if it keeps coming back, what they can do is weaken the tendon. They can weaken the joints and tendons. I have had a lot of chronic tendinosis in both my elbows, both laterally and medially from cycling. So I have a lot of therapy, and before I went to World Championships this year, it was so bad. I went back to my doctor, and I had already had a cortisone injection, and it was hurting so bad breakthrough pain. But he said, I don't want to do another injection because it could really weaken it, and you can't risk to lose that tendon because the way we use our arms just for functionally, not even talking about sports. So that's really the hard part. We have to always balance is, with sports you want to be this athlete, but you also have to remember that we use the same arms. When we get out of the hand cycle, I get back into my chair and I'm still pushing. And so I don't want to lose my everyday functionality, and I really have to balance how hard I push in my sport so that I don't jeopardize or damage my body for everyday living.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point. And the carpal tunnel that you had, was it related to the elbow? I'm always curious about injuries because so many people in wheelchairs have a variety of overuse syndromes, and quite often it's the shoulders, the elbows, the wrists, as you were pointing out with yours. And I've had a couple shoulder surgeries that have been very successful for me. Was there any kind of relationship between the wrist and the elbow as far as the flare-ups?
We don't know for sure. But what we think, again, it may even come back to my neck in that there's another disc. The disc below might be impinging slightly. So hopefully we can take care of it with therapy. In terms of the elbow, because when you have both elbows, generally they start looking at the neck as some other pain when both elbows hurt a lot. The other good thing about taking time off in the fall is that my tendonitis is a lot better. So taking some time off of the bike and not pushing so hard, my elbows are healing a little bit and getting the body a break. Because again, like I said, the bike's all about time on the bike and pushing a lot, and then your body doesn't get a whole lot of time to really recover in the on-season. So, and even the off-season when you're riding 2 hours, 5 days a week, your body's getting a lot of wear and tear and breakdown. So to give yourself a month or a month and a half to kind of just rebuild and reheal everything, it's usually really good, and it feels good. Honestly, I don't miss the bike as much as I love to ride my bike. By the fall, I'm ready to take a little break and do some other things.
Absolutely. Anyone who puts that much time into one thing definitely needs to find ways to stay cross-fit, right? So is there any kind of cross-training that you like to do that can help support your fitness levels, but not have that repetitive movement?
Well, I think swimming is one of the great cross-training ones. And also, I bought the adapted seat for a rowing machine, and I really like that because it uses our back, which everything we do is so much forward, pushing forward, riding the bike forward, that the rowing machine is really getting those back muscles in shape and trying to counterbalance. One of the hardest things that I've found, and a lot of people, spinal cord injuries in chairs, is that after so many years, you roll forward, everything's forward, so your shoulders are hunched forward, and whatever we can do to really strengthen and to counterbalance and get those back muscles and your traps and everything really strong back there to pull yourself back and counterbalance is really great for everything, for posture, for healing, for it just when your body's out of balance is when injury occurs. So,
and breathing too. Good posture really allows us to breathe properly, so we're opened up more. I am curious about the little trainer in me that I'm always curious about new equipment, the adaptive rowing machine. I'd like to know some information about it. The company that makes it, or
WinTech, WINTEC, I believe. But you can also probably go on to U.S. Paralympics website and rowing, because rowing is now a Paralympic sport, and they probably have some resources on that. But it is great, and it's not that expensive. I think it's like $150 or something. It's just a seat, and it goes on any of those, what do they call the trainers, the rowing machines.
In the gym?
I can't even remember it now. Yeah, but I just would take it to any gym, and I would sit the seat down on it, and then I'd put my wheelchair cushion on the bottom because it's really hard, and I'd just sit on my cushion and then strap it in on the seat, so that gives me the stability. Because I don't know about you, Candace, but I've tried to sit on rowing, just the regular seats on the rowing machines, and it's really funny. So
yeah, a little bit like a balloon on a fence post.
Yeah, it's just all over the place. So, and then you can strap your legs in, or you don't have to strap your legs in because the seat is static, so you're not moving. So it's just your upper body that will pull on that rowing machine, and it is a great workout. Let me tell you.
Oh, well, I'm going to look into the WinTech because I'm always looking for something that's going to add some variety and to strengthen my back, because you're absolutely right. That's a critical area for us, and I appreciate that you brought that up. I am surprised that no one on our call wants to ask you a question. I mean, hello, you got Muffy Davis here, for goodness sake.
Are people awake?
I know,
we just answer everyone's questions.
Well, I have a question. If no one else is going to ask it, I'll keep asking. How do you travel with your bike? Do you have a bag? Do you have a box? How does that go? Because equipment, oof, boy.
I know. I went from heavy monoski to big bike. It is actually pretty easy. The Top End makes bags, and there's all different, you can have them custom made, all different types of bags. But the bike does come apart. There's two pieces. There's the front end where, the steering and the front wheel, and then the back frame. And when I travel on flights, I just break it down and put it in this bag, and then my wheels all go in a separate bag. I have also, Candace, just taken it on the airplane like it is, like as a bike, and adaptive equipment. And I just tell them it's adaptive equipment, and they roll it on. I pad if I'm worried. I will pad the hand cranks. I will pad the back, and I will pad the derailleur up front. But other than that, I just roll it right up, and it has fit on some little planes. The guys are great. They come out and they tell me they made it fit. So
that's awesome. Oh my gosh.
Hey, I see a question here. How young can children start using hand bikes? My daughter's 3.5 years old, about 40 inches tall, T2 complete resection. So it's a really good question. I do know that they have young pediatric adaptive bikes, and you can look either on like Sport Aid or on Top End, but I would look and see what their sizing is. But definitely get her, exactly. What kid doesn't want to ride a bike? Get her on that and then check it out.
Oh, you got another one.
They're very adjustable. Okay.
Let's see.
How do you get in and out of it?
Yeah.
How do you get in and out of the bike? A transfer, it's not easy, especially those really, really low recumbent ones. I tell you, after a hard workout, that's the hardest thing. Sometimes I sit on my bike for 5 minutes trying to get the energy to get out of it. But I lift one leg up and will slide it over on the other side of the seat and then slowly just slide myself down into, let's see if we scroll back to some of these pages. Let's see here. And I'll lift my one leg over and slide, and then I slide out. And then when I go to get out, I kind of slide up and slide up the back a little. Let's see. I'll slide up the back and kind of sit. Yeah, well, you won't get that high, but I'll try and kind of sit about middle of the back, and with my one leg resting kind of against the crank, and my other leg over by my chair, and then do a big arm push up. And it's hard. It is not easy, let me tell you, and there are a lot of missed transfers. You have to have good locks on your chair if you're not great at it. The higher, more recumbent or more upright bikes are definitely easier to get in and out of if you're new and just starting.
Right, and your spasticity probably is a piece of the equation also, as far as getting
definitely
in and out
makes it more
safely.
challenging.
Yeah.
Especially when I first get in and my legs start going crazy. Sometimes they just spasm themselves into the footholds, which is nice.
That's perfect. Muffy Davis, you're my champion. Thank you. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us and sharing with us, all this information about the hand cycling. I really appreciate it. I know Rob's got a little bit of housekeeping he's going to do right now, but hey, anytime you want to come talk to us, you're welcome.
This was great. That hour went by so fast.
Thanks for having me. It was truly an honor. Thanks for all that you guys are doing. It's a wonderful program.
Oh, thanks.
Just so people know, if you go to ChristopherReeve.org/sports, that's where the resource information will be posted by Candace, probably in the next 24 hours. And if you go to ChristopherReeve.org/webcasts, at some point, also in the next 24 hours, I will get this posted at that spot, and you'll be able to listen to it again, and you'll also be able to hear other webcasts we've done, including past shows that Candace has done about individual sports. So thank you both very much. This was really informative and a lot of fun, too. You guys are great together.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for listening.